Yeah. Okay.
No, there's no outside the side.
Boy, girl.
Good evening. My name is Radhika Jain, and today we are here celebrating 25 years of excellence at Pearl Academy. And we have a very interesting panel with us today. We have our IFFTI members today. Welcome to all of you. They've been with us for the day today, and they've taken master classes with our students. And now we have them. We're going to share a few comments. They're going to comment, and they're going to share a few views about how the industry is progressing and what can we do to change the future, and how can our students be a very big part of it, as they are the future for our industry. So I would like to introduce all of them. We have Dr. Seto with us. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Professor Campbell, Professor Haley, Professor Colin, Professor Basha, Professor Ott, and Professor Maurizio. I just would like to give a brief idea as to what we are here today is our industry has evolved over the years. You being some of the people who have been in the industry for such a long time. We've seen the industry change its shape, where it started, how we had iconic designers like Chanel and Balenciaga, the ones who molded the industry for us. And today here we are, where there is a lot of cross-culture happening, and there's a lot of interaction happening on a digital level. And we see people sharing their ideas across different countries and states. So I just would like to know that what would be, so trends is something that we say that anything in fashion, it starts with trends. So I would just like to know that what is actually the sustainable part of a trend, because trends, because with the interaction on social media, everything is becoming a fad rather than a classic. So how do you think that the whole idea of trend forecasting can be sustained? Or how do you think that trend will have the same impact as it had earlier? So what would your comments be on it?
I'll kick that off, actually. I'm anti-trend, actually, and I never use that word in teaching or when I talk to students. I think we are now in the era of the individual, and I think this is what we really need to look at. We need more original design, we need less followers, we need more leaders, and we need to encourage, if we're talking about students to really take risks and to produce work which comes from the heart, from their inside. The internet has made the world so much more accessible and so much bigger, but has actually narrowed it down because everybody looks at the same stuff. Yeah. So that's my take on that.
I think I would add to what Basha said, and one of the things that we see amongst ourselves in Manchester and with the students is that we've kind of had enough of concept and won't close. You know, we want to be able to go in, we want to find something, somewhere, a person, a company that's just producing amazing clothing that people can wear, that isn't going to kind of make you look like something from a sci-fi movie. Or, you know, we were in the last session with the students, we were talking about companies like Chanel and Balenciaga and Dior, and you know, they do great shows, but the businesses are based on selling fragrance and accessories and nail polish and so on, and that's okay, but people have got to have clothes. So who's doing that? And some of the most interesting, I think, interesting kind of developments right now in fashion are what the Scandinavians are doing, which is they're diversifying brands into niches. And regardless of income, age, or aesthetic kind of scope, people understand what they're doing, and they look great in the clothes. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what it's about. You want people to consume responsibly without being, you know, without finding it difficult to get in the car in the morning because they're wearing a 13-foot hat. You know, and I think we have a responsibility to students, not to destroy their imagination, but to kind of say to them, that happens that way. Do you understand why that is what it is and why it's important? but this is the moment in time that we're in. You know, as Basha said, there are students in San Francisco and London and Tokyo who are looking at the same images at the same time and responding in a similar way. What's your take on it? And if you're coming from a point of view that, say, you're based in India, how do you take what you can do here that's completely distinctive, very, very beautiful, and add to that kind of design agenda? So, as we say, you add to being a creator and not just a consumer. That's a rant, wasn't it?
I'm going to throw in the odd perspective coming from Australia, and everyone will say, what fashion's in Australia? So when I was talking to the students before, we talked a little bit about moving away from the Eurocentric model, but there were other models of practice you could look at. And I think in terms of the exciting prospect ahead, the future of fashion is, again, these multiple systems of fashion. There is not one system of fashion. The hierarchy of fashion capitals and whatever, you read as many books as you like, everyone's always going to be seduced by Paris. It doesn't mean that there aren't other models of fashion. So the aspiration of the fashion students are changing. So it's not just Paris anymore. Now in Australia, our fashion industry is very different. We don't have large enterprise. The largest we have, probably on a European or US scale, would be small, medium, if on a good day. What we have is micro enterprises. And you'll find around the world there's a potency in these small practices that are quite specific. They often will concentrate on quite a very particular niche area. These are highly sustainable practices. And I think this is when we start to look at different models. And again, they're not trend driven. The scale of the practice doesn't entertain that in any way. But they actually forge a very strong identity. And what I was saying to the students earlier was that one of the things when you're at a university, it's very important to establish your own identity. What are the values that are true to you in your design work? Where do you see, you know, the important aspects of what you're doing? You can explore here all different things and you take advantage of that. You're also a thinker. So unlike people who can just, you know, design and make, in university we test you. We want you to think. We want you to solve things. We also want you to be a citizen of the world. We want you to be conscious of everything that's happening around you. So for me, it's a very bland way of looking at fashions through trend forecasting and the grand fashion capitals of the world. And excuse me if I sound so, but I am Australian and I spend a lot of my time talking to students about empowering themselves and the different things they can do through different systems of fashion and breaking down a hierarchical fashion system. It doesn't need to be like that. In fact, it's a very damaging system and one we cannot afford to sustain.
The trends don't work.
What do you think would be a system that could work in India? Because see, if we talk of Scandinavia and Australia, it's easy to create niche markets. But then do you think in India, what would be a possible future of supposing we are to identify what would be their system? What do you think that would be?
Well, I think it's never one way, and I think that's the breakdown. So for a very long time, the students have focused on what they believe is the pathway. And I think the power of a group like us coming together is to empower our students to believe that there are multiple systems. And I think that's where, as we come together, and it's important to be true to your context, your locality. You know, be proud to where you're based, but you work in a global fashion industry. And you'll always be a player in that. Yeah. So I think that's where we just don't need to make it simple. We need to explore. So as designers, you also design process, business. A lot of the big innovations in the fashion industry occur in the business model. So I think often as we look at innovation, it's getting into what innovation looks like in the fashion industry. But I think it's where we need to be brave with our students and give them lots of different examples. There's not just Paris, New York, you know, whatever, Melbourne. I'll throw that word in. They're the three top ones, aren't they? You know,
why not India? I mean, you know, why not India?
Why not India? Well, why? I mean, everyone, when I say Australia, or whatever, you know, no one wants to talk to me about Australian fashion. I could bore you for hours on Australian fashion. So I just think this is the sort of thing we need to look at in terms of what we can empower our students. And our students are the ones that are going to do this. So we need to give them license to really think about what that might look like. I don't know what it looks like. All I can do is help support that creativity and that mindset.
So here, sorry, but can we say that students can build their own trends here? They can they can.
Just don't use the word trend.
Yeah.
So
They can build it from scratch.
An identity, maybe you would say.
But you don't need trend as a vehicle to be creative.
that's right.
Trends are the crutches that help those who don't know what they're doing. They're the guidelines set by others for the people who don't know. And students really are the creatives. They're the ones who should be driving everything. Look at the strengths of the country. Look at what you do best in India and apply it. Don't deny it and try to change it. Take the best, process it, and put it on a global marketplace.
But
It sounds easy, it's not, you know.
But we can't ignore the business of trend forecasting. I think that's the prevailing fashion system. It makes sure that everybody has a reasonable access to exposure in magazines, what editors are writing about, this kind of sameness, whether it is in color or in pattern. I mean, it's no coincidence that everybody is coming out with plaids at the same time, because there are color forecasters going to fabric mills saying, these are the patterns, these are the colors, and they kind of develop their own variations on it. Having said that, though, I think it's our responsibility as design educators to reconcile the need of that business with really what these new group of designers should be doing. I think they have to be incredibly informed. So they cannot ignore trends, but they can put them aside and say, at least I know what everything is going on and where people are going, and I'm going to go in this direction here instead. And I think we have to continuously challenge these accepted norms, if you will, in our students so that they actually feel at least comfortable or self-confident enough to say, what is this microcosm actually going to look like? And when I was working with the students a little bit earlier, the question I asked them was, what is the Indian fashion identity? It was an early question. Things were a little bit quiet. But once we kind of turned it around and really talked about themselves, their families, their cultures, they actually recognized the fact that, well, the Indian fashion identity is regional. There's many of them, and there's not a single one. And so they actually were beginning to look inward, you know, where they were coming from. So I thought that was quite insightful.
Yeah, if you think about sort of picking up on that, you know, trend and forecasting is a hierarchical system. It's creating channels, right?
Yeah.
And there is a function of that for larger scale business. But I think part of what we're getting at is value and values that students maybe need to be thinking about, and the whole system needs to be thinking about. You know, what we're doing and why. That actually it maybe shouldn't be the motivation to create a massively successful business just for the, you know, just to create lots of revenue and lots of money, but it's actually about what we're doing, you know, to connect and communicate, and being more local and more technology enabled actually is both sustainable and democratized, right? And so if you think about, I always use the metaphor of what happened with music with the invention of the MP3, right? It's easy to understand that once we had a digital format that was somewhat ubiquitous and could distribute the medium, the thing that we consume, in a very distributed way, then the channels for how we consume music just dissipated. And now there's a diversity of music style and experiences that is way more rich than you know, what it was 10, 15 years ago for sure. And that's where we're headed with fashion. It's like, you know, the MP3 effect, and it should continue to go that way. And I think we're seeing it with, you know, the kind of omni-channel experiential platforms that are being developed which everybody heralds as the death of retail, that's what it is. Retail is also a channel, and it's a hierarchical system.
Yes.
So,
but it is in flux.
Yeah.
You know, people. You know, a lot of retail businesses now they're closing. They've lost touch with their consumer.
Yeah.
And the model of you follow what was on the runway in Paris, and you do a version of, and you do the Gucci shoes for $50. A lot of people don't want that. So what we've been teaching students as a process is actually not true any longer. And what we've got to do is think about how people think and how they respond to societal changes and other kind of issues, because that makes you a sustainable designer rather than ripping something off at a fraction of the cost.
That's right.
But it's a much harder thing to kind of get your head around.
There'll always be products and product categories that have a larger mass appeal and that have resonance in different ways. And I think that we need to understand that, just like Robin was saying, that there's a lot of variety in that system, but there is so much opportunity for growth at the micro level, where there's meaning and value embedded in being that type of business. And even if you're a fashion design student, you need to be thinking about not just the thing you're making, but how that thing sits in the whole model, and how you design the model to be part of what you do.
I talk to the students about staying true to their own aesthetic. The style students, stylist students, we're talking about, well, I think I want to work for this magazine, and they have this approach to aesthetic. And I said to them, okay, that's one way of doing this, of going about this, but you also need to stay true to yourself and what you believe in and how you see the world and what your eye is. So I agree with my colleagues, I think.
But the pressure's on the students to be curious and to find out.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things I think I kind of frightened my group. I was saying to them that when you go for an interview, what you're going to say if they say, tell us the 5 most important fashion editors right now in the world. And if you don't know, forget it. So when you buy a magazine, don't just look at the images. Read who makes that happen.
Read the
Compare Vogue China to Vogue Russia, try and understand what this whole thing is about. Engage with it rather than just consume it, which I think too many students just do that. They're enjoying it,
And I also, one of the things I talked a little bit about, because there's a lot at the moment about the changes in job opportunities and what workforces of the future will look like, and the rise of the robot and AI and so on. But what we have in design is imagination. So going back to thinking about that empowerment through imagination and what fashion might become. And I think often we don't give enough license for our students to go to use that imagination. And if we go back and look at all the critical shifts in technology and whatever, someone had this really kooky idea and we've ended up with things that have just become part of our everyday life. I think sometimes we underestimate that in terms of fashion. We do it in design, in decoration, sometimes in manufacturing, but I'm talking bigger than that, in using your imagination to think of what fashion might become. Also the jobs. We play this game in my program where we make up what the new titles of the fashion industry might be. Because as the industry changes all the time, and when your students go out and they're looking for jobs and suddenly this is called this and it used to be called that. So we start to think about, so what will those jobs look like? And also, if you read the literature, people will have multiple jobs. You won't necessarily have one job. The nature. So I actually think we need to spend time with our students really imagining. So what will that future workforce of fashion look like? What are the systems that will we see in operation? I think that's a really good starting point to sort of break down a system that's been reinforced for a long time. And we all know change is a difficult thing. The fashion industry, ironically, is highly conservative. So in terms of where you see change in industry, fashion is incredibly conservative. We like to think we're out there, we can deal with change, trends, change is my middle name. But that is so not change. Green's the new black, green's the new red, who cares? When we talk change, fundamental change for fashion industry. So for me, it's about liberating our students. And again, imagination. You know, that's what you have. And designers are problem solvers. So we just have to remind them and let them loose.
The funny thing about trend is, I think, as one gets older, one cares less, naturally. One was more confident, you know what you like, and the decisions you make are for different reasons. You don't need to stand out. You forget about trend, and then you think about style. And when trend is put away, that's what you have. So I always encourage students to think, I'm using the word beauty a lot lately. I'm saying, why isn't that beautiful? Now, beauty is subjective, of course, and I don't put my concepts of beauty upon them, but I want them to question the aesthetic, the purpose, the need, why it needs to exist. Because there are so many things that shouldn't actually have been born, you know? And this thing about ugly and beauty, very simple, basic words, but I do think they need to be applied and considered and thought about. And, you know, we don't need so much product. And sustainability, again, the word is overused. It's really important, you know, very simple things.
I asked, in the conversation with my group of students, I asked them to look at something like YouTube and you know, bring out the number of other students. So there's a couple of FIT in New York, and I subscribe to their vlogs because they're great. They're funny, they're vicious, they're really, really, no, but they're really contemporary, you know. And you know, these people will talk about a show or an event or a collection in a way that you actually would like the magazines to do, but they won't do because of the relationship with the company.
But that's reality.
I know
this
it is
real world
but
stuff.
From that conversation, there was a couple of guys who were asking questions, and we were talking about them developing their own website, and I was suggesting that what they should think about is choose just one thing they're good at, which might just be colour, or it might just be that they are the best people to look at denim in the entire group, and that is what you build your career on, because you begin to position yourself so you're passionate, you're professional, and it distinguishes you, you know, and you can move through the industry with that motivation.
Become a specialist.
Forget all this other nonsense that a lot of you teach. You know, I mean, how many mood boards do you want to look at in an interview? You'd far rather find some person who's just the king of buttons.
Exactly. Where is the king of buttons?
Well, do you know what I mean? Though? That would be refreshing.
Is the place for the king of buttons. You know, you got it here.
Or someone who's the most amazing stylist because they know where the markets are, where there's a new bookshop, or that's the kind of thing that companies don't have time to go and figure out. You know.
And robots are hopeless at it as well.
Robin was talking about the changing nature of jobs, and I think, you know, there's a lot of talk about precarious work. I think it has negative connotations to it, but young people, I think, are not so against precarious work because it's about life balance. And I think they're stitching their jobs together in terms of a little bit of a contract work here, a little bit of freelance work here. It's definitely not 9 to 5. You know, that's not meaningful anymore. It may pay the bill, but it's back to what you were saying is sort of the specialist and finding their niche. And I think in the way I talk to my students in Canada is that our reputation has been built on technical expertise, incredibly unsexy but very rewarding careers. Those people define their own hours, they pick their clients they want to work with, you know, they spread it out, and it's quite rewarding. And the thing is, I think skills, technical skills or graphic skills or a specialty are really, really important because we can no longer be generalists. There's way too much out there. We need to know too much. Things are moving so quickly that we're going to become sort of the antithesis of being generalists, and that is, I'm going to do this one thing, I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to let people know that's who I am.
I think too, there's too many. I mean, the best fashion schools in the world used to have sort of 4 students graduate, you know, but we as a business have just exploded, you know, and there are far too many students who are drawn into the subject, and some are creators, some are consumers, some are somewhere in the middle, But generally speaking, we have to meet targets as a business to recruit and progress and so on. So that, in a way, can kind of dumb down the curriculum.
That
a
gives
little
us a
bit.
lot of responsibility.
That is what I just wanted to ask, that what
Because-
are the basic skill sets that the industry looks up to when students go out looking for a job? What are the basic skills that a student should have, you know, to land in a company where they are also following the forte, basically they are also doing well in what is their forte, and they're also fulfilling the needs of the industry. So what are those basic skill
Depends on, I
sets?
think it depends on what you might resonate with coming in to a fashion degree program. And, you know, so, I mean, I think all of us have been involved in educational models that are evolving to try to meet the multifaceted needs and interests of students. But part of what is at the core of all of that, there's some skill set things that I think, you know, any given employer is going to want to be able to see that have to do with whether or not you know, let's say in design, whether or not you understand basic pattern making, how things are constructed, and you know, how to communicate your design ideas through illustration or other techniques, right? But what sits at the core of that is whether or not it's clear that you are engaged and inspired by research and by digging into understanding and translating the world into something that others want to buy, you know, that people will get excited about. So, you know, the employers that I talk to in the U.S. Very consistently say, you know, they're looking for students who want to, who are communicative, who are engaged and excited and passionate about the work, and are clearly thinking about what they're involved in. And what that means to me as an educator is that fashion is actually more like a way of knowing or a lens that we apply to the world, right? And it includes some core skill sets that are based in technical ability. You have to have some of those things. But it's also about how we translate the world through fashion to make it be what, you know, to make it work as a system.
I think some basic things like getting to class on time, not being late, not being on their phone halfway through the class. I think, like Colin just said, I think I scared the hell out of the students I was speaking to right now, because as I was speaking to them, 3 of them were on their phones, and I just said, right, there are 3 people in this room I'm not interested in right now. And you could see they kind of were still on their phones while I was saying this, and I said they were on their phones. Suddenly they picked up. But it's basic stuff. It's how you communicate. It's how you hold yourself. It's the passion for your work. Very, very simple, hard. The things that why my parents were successful is because they were committed. So the skills, of course, the technical skills, the talent, of course, but the basic, how you carry yourself. So we're starting to integrate this now as part of the fashion design MA, which these things were never taught, and I'm putting them in because I want them to get jobs. I want them to pass those interviews. I want them to be able to negotiate with buyers. I want them to not lose their temper. I want them to speak well.
So we actually have professional practice. Yeah. So part of what we do, and we actually do it from first year all the way through to 4th year. So all our programs have professional practice. And part of professional practice, you need to know your industry. You cannot enter industry without knowing your industry. So that's a very important thing. Also in terms of your capabilities, and going back to Colin's earlier point about the number of graduates, I think we need just to remind our graduates that you don't get a snap job. You can study a fashion design degree and use those capabilities in other areas.
True.
So the trend is, because I spend a lot of my time justifying the number of students I put through the school, we're the largest provider of fashion in Australia. So if anyone's going to ask about where fashion's going and how many graduates we have, they're going to talk to me. So I can actually give them fairly compelling statistics about where our students go. Not all of them will enter into the principal fashion industry, but they will move into related creative industries. We also find the capabilities that we get asked for is, again, it's thinking, it's problem solving, because why would you hire a university graduate? You know they're going to be more expensive, they're going to come, they're probably going to... The thing we remind our students is you enter into an employment agreement. You don't go in there and start telling your boss what they're going to do. You have to enter into that environment, and then step by step you actually become part of that, and then they empower you. So their testing you when you enter in is to respect the environment. So we always say to students, know the industry you're entering into, know the company you're applying for, make sure you know it well, understand that you signed something, you are working with them, it's not your business, it's their business. But in terms of the one, it's communication. So in terms of working in a global fashion industry, if you're designing in one country, manufacturing somewhere else, you know, you're chasing a supply chain where your raw materials come from, you might have to either talk on the phone, use email, or work with a diverse team. You're not going to work with people that are your best friends. That's probably the biggest revelation to describe to a student, that you don't choose who you hang out with when you get employed.
That's why we do group work.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Group
but the capabilities, I think we're not obvious enough to our students. I've actually asked a lot of my team this year to actually explain what the capability does, because I think we assume too much. Sometimes we can quite happily sit here and talk all about this. And, you know, do our students get that? We're the ones who design the programs, you know, we say this will deal with this and this. So we have to remind the students what their degree does. We have to give them license to use it. Do you realise you have this? You know, your employer will say, wow, they can do this. So make sure you put that out there. But I think we need, as educators, to get much better about reminding our students these capabilities and empowering them to use them. And they won't get a copycat. They won't see the title of the degree on the title of the job they end up with.
This is why I'm actually more interested in speaking with the disruptors in our industry, particularly retailers. And they're telling me that we're not so sure about fashion students coming out of fashion schools. We're looking for soft skills, so communication skills, critical thinking, problem solving, independent, collaboration, right? We need no soloists. We need nothing of this kind of sort. And they now tend to, at least this one retailer, go like pick up MBAs because they have sort of this skill set. They communicate well, you know, they think critically, they've always worked in teams. And to sort of say, well, you know, maybe we need to rethink in terms of what the fashion school system has relied on for decades and how we need to sort of adapt to this new reality.
We actually kind of nail our colours to the mast before the students enroll, you know, with the open days for recruitment. And what's quite interesting where I am, we've got at the end of the undergrad programs, our employment is probably the highest in the university. And it's probably because the subject is quite distinct from other subjects. So all of our programs have an option for a 1 year in industry, and that can be anywhere in the world. We have industry input every week. Every Wednesday we have a kind of an open mic session. And sometimes it's people, and they're dreadful, but the students get more from that than one of us standing there. Exactly. You know, and I mean, to be honest with you, it's a really tough program, but it's good because at the end of it, the students tell us that they can look back on what they've learned, and that the ones that go in placement for a year, I kid you not, they come back in a year's time. They look like the same people, but they're completely different.
Of course.
You know, it takes them a few weeks to kind of settle back into the academic life because they've been used to doing things on a much tighter turnaround, and so they've had a chance to practice the theory before they come back. You know, and it makes a lot of difference.
Also
really
believe
does.
education more when they've actually seen it working in industry, because coming from us, we're just telling them. But when they actually do it, they come back and the respect is actually there. So they're easy to teach, I think.
And I think what we don't what we don't do is we don't tend to kind of nurture a preciousness about what is happening. What we're interested in is a context. So long as the student can say, well, I've done my research and this is why I'm doing this, that's absolutely perfect. But if it's something that's presented that's a meaningful moment to them, we're not interested. You're on the wrong course. And that helps define the differences, I think, from one school to another.
beyond that, the only thing I would add is that I think it's probably for all fashion students being subjected to an experience where they have to go out of their element, be somewhere else, or do something that they have to navigate a different cultural experience, or so there's an expectation for knowing what you know and being comfortable and confident with what you know, and then participating in the system. So it's about perspective taking for yourself and from others. It's about awareness, locally and globally, and it's about sort of informed risk taking. How do you know? Because anybody who's graduating from a fashion degree program is kind of blessed with the responsibility of being the ones who take the risks to move something forward, to make change, right? And so those things are really important skill sets, that are part of what should be embedded in a degree program.
I told the students that they need to realize that education is always ongoing. It doesn't end when you finish school. You're always learning from your environment, from your peers, from the people you're working with, and also to be open to coming back to school to get additional training in something that seems to be the gaps, It's an ongoing process.
So what do you think about students going further for their education? Like, if there's a student exchange program that happens, how important is it, or what kind of an opportunity does it open the student to? Or how valuable is it for a student to go out and study, or for a student from outside to come to India and study? What do you think about that student exchange idea?
I think it's life-changing.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's within your own country or your own city. It's just adding that richness that you have for the rest of your life.
Another way of describing what we've been talking about is that students who are educated in fashion have to essentially become humble leaders. And we don't think of those things as going together, but actually those are really important coupled traits that you get through those experiences. That going and traveling somewhere else, or engaging in another culture and thinking about what you know, helps you to become both a leader and more humble.
Good points.
It's
transformative. That's all you can say is that it's transformative. It changes perception or perspective, and going outside of your own culture will do that, I think, more quickly than many other opportunities.
It's structured at that point in your life where you're learning, and you can bring back stuff and try it out and what have you. I mean, I'm looking for a fashion school where the students don't know who Kim Kardashian is. And if I can find it, I'll send tons of students there.
We done those.
Well, if you know, let me know.
Anyway, please finish.
Look at the camera and put your call out now.
A Kardashian-free zone. But that's just rot.
Well, the motivation for students from my school, so this is Toronto, Canada, to go abroad is actually quite different. For one, Toronto is a very multinational city. More than half the people's language is not English, and they were born outside the country. We're a downtown campus. We're so diverse. To us, it's ubiquitous. But what I find my students come back with is the way how they get inspired, how they actually stop to use the internet to get ideas. Because though we're a city, we don't really have this ongoing set of exhibits and things like that where students can get inspired. I mean, we have museums, but they're kind of static. But to go to places like London or Nottingham or Hong Kong or down to Melbourne, it's just, they're out there, they get inspired by nature, different environments. And that's how they come back completely transformed. Not so much about the cultural experience, but about, I guess, the access to inspiration in different environments.
And we shouldn't underestimate the impact they have on their fellow students.
Yes.
So I think often we look at the individual experience, But what we find is when they come back and share that experience, because not everyone can do that. So let's be fair, not everyone, due to their own personal circumstances, can actually do that. So we try and make that we get that being shared back. But also what it does in the classroom where you have an exchange student and you might have 3 or 4, someone from Germany, and again, what it does to the local cohort. So suddenly, you know, and they're sharing what their school's like here, and we hear lots of things that we shouldn't share, but we find a lot of things about other schools, and they'll probably find a lot about us when they go back as well. But I think that's really interesting, and often it levels out, and sometimes there's something about your school that someone from Germany is really impressed with, and our students have really taken for granted. I go, yeah, maybe the studio's not so bad, or you know. So you actually, and then they'll say something that's really good, in, you know. So I think there's something really healthy about that. But I think it's not just that person is transformative. I think you can move it further in transformation through the cohort, getting advantage of having, you know, that crossover. So I think it's really a good thing to do. Yeah.
We've been saying that India is, I mean, we started by saying that India is the place that culture is very much enriched, and it has all sorts of states and taste and sense of beauty and so on. So what do you think stops people, students from outside India to come to India? Because see, it's very, what I've noticed, I mean, since I've been here, is that there is a trend of an Indian going abroad, and there is almost a desire of it. While the rest of the world is aware of what India has to offer in terms of inspiration, in terms of colors, in terms of fabric and so on. But what stops, do you think, an Australian student or an American student or a European student to come to India? Because that is quite kind of, why do we have the need, why an Indian has the need to move out? Most probably because whether we like it or not, the fashion capital is still there in somehow, and that kind of context motivates them. So what do you think India should do to create that kind of interest and stop the stopping of coming to India to be inspired and to, I mean, I wouldn't say to
change the thinkers, get more staff to get more academics moving, because they're the people that help the students make decisions about what they might do later on in their study.
I think also very students who may want to come to India. I actually think there are a lot more coming than we realise. There are a lot of programs, a lot of exchange programs. They're not done through schools though, they're done through NGOs and they're done through different systems. But the one thing about India, and this is from personal experience, is that I come here and I really want to find that artisan who has never been touched by other human eyes. Now, for me to find that artisan is extremely difficult. So I will be taken to a village where it's all been sanitized and prepared because, you know, foreigners are scared of India because this may happen, this may happen. So it's very hard to break through the layers to get what you actually want. So therefore you come, you try, you don't see what you really want, so you kind of don't come back. I come back and I dig, but it's hard work. And it's not just India, I think that's with any country, with China, with Brazil. If you want to get to the roots, it's very hard to get there. So India could perhaps facilitate that through, like Colin says, having more international academics maybe here who can find those inroads and then open them up. But not the fake tribes and villages. We want the real ones.
So do you think Pearl should look at facilitating this kind of...
So there are study tours. So there are a lot of study tours to India.
They're not...
But I'm just saying, in terms of exchange, and I was talking to a couple of people from Pearl earlier and said to create 6 slides for me. Because what we've discovered with our students is that they go through, dare I say the word, trends in terms of where they want to go. And recently we've had students that no longer want to go to Paris. So that's a major trend, a major shift. We cancelled a whole trip to Paris because we didn't get the numbers. That's never happened in the history of our programs. So you start to see there is a shift in thinking about a bigger world, other things to look at, more curiosity. So I think what often we don't do with the exchange programs, and again I'll take full responsibility for this in my university, is we don't actually show people the world. So often they'll go to the exchange office, they'll fill it out. The only things they know are the big names or countries. Oh yeah, Italy, yeah, you know. And afterwards, go, why didn't you talk to us? You put in your application to the exchange office, and we haven't sat down. So what I like to do, like in first and second year, because we usually send exchange in third year, is show them a richness. And then you might actually find that India would be there, but they've never thought about it.
Yeah.
So it could be something as simple, and that's why I said I was happy to try that. It could be something as simple as just not being in that thinking at the moment because they haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah. Our two biggest trips every year.
They don't get exposed to. See, what happens is, I mean, you can also probably share your view. Normally, in Europe or anywhere else, we do have a need to expose people to something that is not, that they're not aware of. But at the same time, in India, there is not that exposure towards London, for example. It's not that people here talk every day about London or about Paris or about, but then there is the need, where I don't see that desire of somebody, whether as much as you can expose a student, do you actually manage to make a desire to come to India, or what is it?
Well, we have two trips every year. Our biggest trips are Shanghai, and that's made up of business, mainly fashion business and fashion promotion students, a few fashion design. And the students pay for that trip. It costs each one roughly £1,000. And the itinerary they get is bumper to bumper. They come home exhausted. But they go, and it's popular, because the staff understand what the industry is in Shanghai, and you know they're able to access businesses and various kind of facilities in Shanghai that they wouldn't be able to access if they were tourists. So because we put that package together, it makes sense. They understand the relevance of what they're studying. They go.
It's getting package right.
Exactly.
It's,
So
you
if there was a similar,
yeah.
and actually now you're talking about this, we are actually looking at a student trip to Sri Lanka, because across the staff team, there's enough expertise in Sri Lanka that we think this sounds like it could be a credible.
It's collaboration with schools as well.
Yeah.
It's not, for example, say Pearl Academy creating a trip.
No.
Here's the trip. Do you want to send your students? Actually, no, it should be a collaboration, because we all, even look at America, Australia, UK, Hong Kong, Canada, and each of us actually has a different approach, and our students will be different and will be attracted to different things. So it's a combined...
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but there are a few questions from our watchers, and so there are a few students who are asking about what is the scope of fashion management jobs on a global level. And how is it that if students are not from the fashion background, and if they want to, but they want to pursue a career, they've not pursued an education in fashion, but they want to pursue a career. So how is it possible for them to, fit that in? So these are the two questions that I'm getting from the audience.
Well, in my experience, and I think Robin was alluding this earlier, it's virtually impossible to break into the fashion business unless you've sort of organically grown up in it. So the thing that we offer is really networking within the industry. I find that it's not impossible to get a fashion job, especially if it's sort of a related production job or whatever it might be. But I think that's the benefit of going to fashion school, is you are being assimilated by the industry at that time, and it's that network that you have. Other than that, it's really tough to break into it.
There are master's programs in fashion management. I mean, we have a Masters of Fashion Enterprise. We get people coming out of all sorts of industry. We get people with bachelors of business who want to come in and actually, and we work with industry partners. So we actually end up that some of those might then get offered a job through their master's program. So it's that translation, taking the capabilities that you've got out of a business degree, and then what does that look like in a fashion industry?
If you don't have some expertise, whether it's experiential or educational, you'll reach a point where you can't progress because you're a generalist, and people don't want. There are too many really good specialists out there, so you will reach a level. That's it. Your career's flatlining.
Oh, I like the special effects.
Yeah, boom.
And a lot of people now going back to do masters, having actually been in industry for a certain amount of time, realising they cannot progress, coming back to do masters, MBAs, masters programs.
So then a master and an MBA can be one of the way in which a person can.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that now, and they've grown. If you look at the suite of master's degrees that have grown in the last 5 years, and there's a lot of talk about the potency of the masters, which has really taken over. So a lot of employers do look for masters.
That's right. Yes.
So that's what we need to do with, and that's for our students. And we talked about that in the group that I was with about, you know, like in Europe, to be a junior designer, they look for a master's degree and so on. So we had a bit of conversation about that. So I think in terms of management, you do need to look at that as well, because Colin's quite correct. You can get in, but then you'll never get beyond a certain.
Yeah, and the master.
It's true. It's very true.
Master of none.
The masters is the new bachelor's.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is indeed.
It's the base.
In this business.
Yeah.
One last question. Can a student who has studied fashion design in India look forward for a fashion job abroad? And would the Indian approach be sufficient to prove yourself on a global level?
What is the Indian approach?
Sorry,
Oh, we both said the same thing. What is the Indian approach?
straight on it, you know.
The Indian approach, I think the student means in the sense that just the idea in terms of exposure about the culture that is there in India, because we definitely know for sure that the Indian sensibility of fashion or the Indian take towards fashion is much different to what it would be on a global level or what it would be anywhere else where the student would want to pursue a career. So is it enough for a student to have that amount of knowledge about the Indian culture and the craft and pursue a career abroad?
Of course. It just depends what they
think
want.
It depends on the individual.
It depends what they want to do.
It depends on the individual student.
Yeah.
You know,
I think
That's
the
a very
question,
difficult question.
the question's based on the idea that there's a formula.
Is because I am, as you must have noticed, I'm a freshly graduated person teaching here. This question would have come up is because when students go to college, the first question that we ask is, can you list 5 international designers? And they get stuck at, and there are most of the times that students don't know names like Balenciaga, they don't know Paul Poiret, and all of these. So that's where I think this question would have come up, that just the Indian approach, is it enough for a student to actually excel in terms of a career abroad? That must be the point of view.
But just remind your students, they have more than just their craft and culture, they're designers. So going back to all the principles we talked about the thinking, the decisions you make, and that whole design process. So sometimes you step back. I talk to the students about some of the graduates from Australia, the place with no supposedly fashion industry, and where they've ended up. And in terms of just thinking, so you just have to think about, and who cares if you don't know who Balenciaga is? Sorry, but I think you just have to move away from that.
Yeah.
And also, it's not just about your craft and culture. It's the design skills. It's what you do with it. And also, the industry is hungry for diversity. They don't want the sameness, the sort of the template of the fashion this. So there is something in that difference. I mean, that's how a lot of Australians end up in a serious interview and get a job because, oh wow, we've never had Australian before. It's a bit of a novelty the way they look at the, and you think, and they're in. So
I was saying that, if you're going for a job with Levi, don't turn up with a portfolio of red carpet dresses. You'll get real. No, I mean, seriously, do your research, Google who you think will be interviewing you. And all you've got to do is have the chair of the interview panel. When you leave the room, say to the flunkies in the room, he was good or she was pretty good. They will endorse it and you've got the job. And never ever say you've got a passion for fashion.
And be adaptable and change your portfolio for every interview, for every job. And it's just, somebody was saying, all the students here are designers, they happen to live in India.
That's right.
It's not a burden, it can be a huge benefit. And I'm always saying, again, whenever I visit different countries, is that look at your own industry, don't keep trying to escape to somewhere that you think is better, because actually the whole fashion business is in complete disarray at the moment. So don't think by going to London or Paris or New York, everything's going to get better. Actually, India's in a position now to develop an infrastructure, to actually develop its own industry and to make it really solid. and to look at a home market, look at the markets directly outside, not just those unattainable dreams. Get real.
I've recommended they set their own business up now. Create your own opportunity. Develop a concierge service for young men in India. Where do you get a decent cocktail after work? Provide that kind of service and just be really, really good at something.
It's the consumer.
Rather
Consumer is
than
king.
wanting to go and work for Balenciaga.
Understand who you're producing for.
Seriously,
But I think
We just got an RMIT graduate at Balenciaga, so there you go.
Oh, the job is gone.
But I remember the first time I visited a student on placement at Alexander McQueen, and I felt so guilty. There were hundreds and hundreds of students making cups of tea and pinning pieces of lace, and I thought, this is horrendous.
None of that's changed.
I think in a way,
It's a dream.
what I've noticed again by living here is that probably the question happened because of that, not every school here offers an updated curriculum at times. So if you consider the fact that Indian history of fashion is about non-cutting garments, so probably that being maybe less skilled into understanding how a garment is shaped could create that sort of question. I believe probably this is what the student asked, if there is a scope for an Indian designer to work as
or an Indian designer. But for that matter, I would like to answer. Rahul Mishra, one of the most famous designer who has he has showcased his work on an international platform, and he still does it. So, in fact, even the buyers that come here at Fashion Weeks, most of them are either from, they are mostly from outside India, they're not from India, and they are the ones who are buying these products at bulk, and they are buying the Indian silhouettes. So
I think India needs to capture the moment, because we met with a designer yesterday, and I actually said to him, I had a real conversation with a buyer from Blaine Crawford 2 weeks ago who said, we've discovered this amazing Indian designer, and I can't remember the name, I wish I could tell you now, and he makes extremely expensive red carpet dresses. So straight away my eyes are like, oh God, red carpet dresses, here we go. And then she continued to say, they have sold out, because China is going crazy for occasion wear, Asia is going nuts about it. And for me, occasion wear didn't exist. I've spent 25 years telling students to stop designing it because there are no special occasions.
Now everyone needs it.
So suddenly, it made me reflect, and it didn't make me think, oh my God, I don't know what I'm talking about. This one conversation, this is Lane Crawford. They're very powerful. They are the biggest, the biggest buyer of luxury in Asia. So, and this is an Indian designer, and she was telling. There you go. We've got some information there. So,
but it's not everything. I mean, I was asking students, have you heard of Uniqlo? Nothing. Have you heard of COS? Nothing. Have you heard of Arket? Nothing. And to be truly glally connected, you've got to know who's doing stuff.
You've got to know the world.
Again, it goes back to being a thinker and a researcher. I think part of what it means, and it's related to the question about can you go into design management if you haven't had a degree in fashion, right? What it means to be fluent in our industry is to understand what exists and also be willing and able to figure out how to translate something into something new, right? So, a lot of our students work with Vibhu Mohapatra, who is an Indian designer in New York, and he does evening wear. It's mostly Western, but there are influences that are clearly from Indian culture that are in his work, and it's known. There's not 100 Indian-based designers who are in New York, but there are individuals who are making that work. But it's about translating the elements that you're excited about from your own culture and making it accessible to other buyers, to customers who want to be part of that. And so it might not be about hanging on to a traditional Indian silhouette, or but it might be some other element.
Our industry is one of the sexiest, most glamorous. Everybody wants to be part of it. So imagine me saying to you, well, can I get into architecture? I haven't trained in it, but I'm a good manager.
Yeah, to
Is
build
that okay? I love drawing.
Yeah.
It's as ridiculous for me to say that as it is to hear that question. But it just seems that everybody thinks that fashion, or the amount of students that say, I want to be a stylist. And I say, well, do you know what styling involves? Well, no, but it's a great job, right? I can't deal with that anymore. You have to look at the jobs that require, the skills that are required for each job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's nonsense, basically.
Who was it said fashion has no mercy? Someone said that.
Wasn't that Colin?
No, it wasn't. No, but I remember that really quite clearly.
Devil wears Prada.
Yeah, it's one of them. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much,
Pleasure.
everyone. It was a great session. We got to get a lot of information about where the industry is. I'm sure all of you would have got your answers, and we are still open for any more questions, which we will be in contact with them, and we will try and help you with your problems, and we'll try and give you a better view to the future. Thank you so much, everyone, for the panel. It was great having a conversation. We hope to see you again soon. All right. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.